James Farr, live from Pasadena Media Studios. Get ready for more piercing and provocative. The Conversation Live starts now. And welcome to another episode of The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Today, we're going to have a critical and possibly uncomfortable conversation. Joining me in the seat today is the Chief of Pasadena Police Department, John Perez. But before we welcome John in, this past Friday, a 36-year-old man, Daniel Warren, was tragically shot and killed in an incident involving the Pasadena Police Department. Let's find out a little bit more about that, and then we'll check back in with John in just a second.
A Pasadena man reportedly wearing a tactical vest and carrying a long rifle has died after exchanging gunfire with Pasadena police Friday around 6:45 in the evening. The man died in the backyard of a home near Glen Avenue at Howard Street. He has been described as an area resident who lives in that neighborhood. It is not clear if the man took his own life or was shot by police. No officers were injured during the incident. Pasadena Chief of Police John Perez told Pasadena Now that officers were dispatched to the 1500 block of Glen regarding an individual with a tactical vest and a long rifle. Arriving officers exchanged gunfire with the suspect. The suspect was later found in the backyard of a nearby residence, and he was deceased. Perez said the shooting investigation will be conducted by Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department homicide detectives. Perez called the incident a tragedy, but said arriving officers were confronted by a dangerous individual and the officers acted properly and professionally. We ask the community to support them as we go through the investigation, he said. For Pasadena Now, this is James McPherson.
Welcome back. Chief Perez, thanks so much for taking the seat, and I'll cut some of the formalities and just call you John. We'll just get straight to it. Very tragic situation last Friday night involving some of your officers, involving a resident. May is National Mental Health Awareness Month, and the statistics say that that 1 in 5 people may have a mental health issue. I know this is early on. I know there are some things that you may be able to discuss today. There's some things you may not be able to discuss. But I noticed in the statement that you made that the officers did conduct themselves professionally and accordingly. Is it too early to make that assessment now, though? I mean, we want to wait for the investigation and all the facts and everything to come out. Is it too early to kind of make that? Because some may see that as possibly spinning a narrative.
I think what's important is to look at the facts as we share them publicly with the community and really evaluate and assess their tactics and the things that happened during that night. All the facts are still being put together, so we'll know more about that. What I do know is initially with the information provided and what I was able to see, the officers did in fact act professionally, and we were faced with just a situation they had to make a quick decision on. And this is where we're at. So I think it's not too early to make that type of statement when I've seen the onset of the video. What's important to know is as the facts come in and more of the information is gathered and analyzed, then we could have that further discussion about the tactics and the approach and all these different things that might have happened. That's where I think it becomes really important, the type of conversation for the community thereafter.
Could the HOPE team have been involved? I mean, could something else happen other than what happened? And I know you weren't there, I wasn't there, but just...
We'll never know. I don't think we'll ever know. We'll never know. There was, over 300 active shooters last year in this country. We don't know if that was going to be an active shooter. We don't know if it was a way for him to end his life either. We don't know. We just don't know. And so I think we have to act on the information that we have and the care for the community and the decisions that we make. Can't wait at times. You can't just call for a negotiator and wait 5 minutes or an hour when somebody might be acting before that. We don't know what might happen, so we have to make decisions.
What's going through an officer's mind, kind of in that moment? Because we talked a little bit earlier, and you said the difference between a second could have a different outcome. Whether or not someone shoots or doesn't shoot, or what are officers thinking? I mean, and I'm not asking you about these officers.
Just in general.
I'm asking you from your experience as a line cop?
First thing you care about is protecting the community. When you arrive on scene, you are searching around and looking for anybody that's been injured, people that have been shot, people that are in a place where they can't get out. So that's the first thing you do. You know that it's not about you. You know it's about the people around you in that community. Once you've given that evaluation, your next step is to ensure you don't make mistakes where you become in a position where you've been shot or you've been injured and people have to rescue you. So the tactics, our approach, we're thinking it through, all those things become important. Fortunately, all our officers have had some level of crisis negotiation training, understanding mental illness, having 2 sessions of implicit bias, and we're going to go through another one. So all these things are out there, so the officers have all the skill sets. What we're asking for now is we're asking for the officers in today's world to put all that training into a fraction of a second or a few seconds and start making quick decisions.
Well, I definitely, you know, we were going to talk about de-escalation. We're going to talk about some training and different things. But, you know, back into this mental health space, because again, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And what specifically are officers being trained to recognize that someone may be in a mental health crisis episode? Because possibly people with mental health issues and ailments may carry a gun. I mean, how do we not end up in situations like this, I guess?
Absolutely. Early intervention is the easiest thing to say. Prevention of mental illness is another place we should be. There's a lot of study in logotherapy about mental illness and social organization and having a healthy lifestyle and habits. It's not always that simple. Once that fails, you have an intervention process. You hope family or friends are able to provide services for somebody or even medications. It gets worse if somebody is in fact homeless, because who is providing that service for them? The police departments try to help where we can. We do outreach. We have our HOPE team and we have our neighborhood action team. The officers have been trained every year on mental illness, being able to recognize signs and trying to do outreach, and they call out to the HOPE team on a regular basis to help out. But we hope all that work prevents a place where we're hoping for cooperation. We're hoping for people to work with us, because if that's failing, then we have a situation we have to deal with. The problem with de-escalation, which is a fancy word for communication and persuasion, is basically we need cooperation. If you wanted me to give you this cup and I just didn't want to, it's just at some point I have to be willing to give you this cup. And so it becomes a situation where it becomes much more serious than a cup on people's lives. But it's difficult. It's difficult.
When do you anticipate releasing, you know, a critical incident video and all of the video, minus the necessary redactions? When can the public expect to see that?
I don't know yet. The investigation's not ours. I got to work with the sheriff's department and ensure that we have a working relationship with them, obtain the video and the approvals to go ahead and release it. So we're working together as law enforcement agencies. So I don't know yet. I don't know. You know, if it was up to us, and we've seen this in the past. A couple of events, we've had those ready to go pretty quick. I just don't know yet.
So
I don't want it to be.
It won't be Friday. It won't be this week. It won't be any time in the immediate future.
Yeah, I don't think for a couple of weeks at least. I really can't talk about a timeline. But I am pushing for one.
Okay.
I am trying to get there. I think it's important for us to put out this information. And when it comes to transparency and accountability, there's a lot of things that must occur for our community to become one. We don't have a better police department without the community supporting us.
When will we know the name of the officers involved?
At some point they'll be released as well. I don't know that timeline as well. It's way, way too early for me to look at all that.
And considering SB 1421 that went into effect this past January, requiring, saying that you shall release use of force records, will the agency, the department, take a position of just being transparent, here it is, or will we, the media, kind of have to go through all of the steps and procedures through Request for Public Information Act?
I think it's both. I think it's us abiding by the law, and it's also the media doing their role as well. So I think it's a collective effort between the two.
All right, let me check in. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. My guest today is the Chief of Pasadena Police Department, John Perez. We're having a pretty uncomfortable conversation about a critical incident resulting in a resident losing his life. That's Daniel Warren, 36, out of Pasadena. We're also going to talk about some pending legislation that's being proposed, AB 932, which will require law enforcement to de-escalate. Let's get some background and some context on that, and then John and I will jump back into the conversation.
California legislators
have the opportunity
to save lives
by passing AB 392.
instead of shooting first. The bill requires cops
To use alternatives.
instead of taking lives.
While this seems like common sense,
It's not the common practice in California.
right now,
Police can use deadly force.
even when they have other options,
too many families.
like mine.
have been shattered by police violence.
Let's prevent more tragedies.
Stop.
Stop.
Stop the killings.
Please.
pass.
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 Pass AB 392. Pass.
AB.
392.
I'm a mom. I have 3 children who I want to love and protect. This bill is about keeping them safe. This bill is about ensuring that they don't have targets on their backs. This bill is about letting us live.
And welcome back. John, thanks again for sitting down with me. I know you had a very busy schedule, so we're going to power through this. I mean, the law is going to be the law.
Correct.
You and I don't determine that.
Correct.
So it's going to be what it's going to be. How are you feeling? Like, how will AB 392 affect the way policing is done?
Yeah, it's a two-part discussion. The first is the AB 230 from the police officer side that talks about training and ensuring we have the right resources and equipment and the money set aside for the training that's required. I think it's an important part of the conversation. In a moment, I'll talk about what the Pasadena Police Department has done to indicate how important that is, to really have an imperative to show you what we could do. 392 is problematic. I think it's a start point. I think it's the families, the mothers that we hear on the advertisement is really important to us. It's tragic for everybody that's lost their lives. Mm-hmm. It's not a place I don't think that the police officers wanted to be honest with you. There's no way somebody could tell me different from that. But when you've read through, and I have the Graham versus Connor and the reasonable objectiveness, when you read at the amount of work our justices did from a federal standpoint to look at the importance of understanding human nature and human mistakes and the quick decision that happens on beliefs happens to us every day in much less important things. The one we could see the most is probably out of sports. That I can make a lot of analogies that people would connect to, but it's completely different because we're talking about people's lives, right? And so I think that 392 is a start point, but not where we want to be. It's a hindsight evaluation of the officers' decision making. It does create problems for them. I think it really requires things to occur which might not be the situation. Most policies, in fact, I would care to offer that all policies in all 491 cities in the state have a de-escalation requirement in it.
I mean, because some people, it's a popular thought that there is no de-escalation policy within Pasadena Police Department.
That's correct.
It's there. I mean, it's in plain sight. It's available for people to look at. But I think how they experience contact with law enforcement, right, and where that implicit bias kind of comes into play. Because you touched on that earlier, right, you know, with some of the training and emotional intelligence and how important that is. How do we train police to not be biased? Because I did a training, a simulation, and I clearly could see my biases factoring into my decision to shoot. I shot 4 people. I shot one person who was, to me, looked like a 6'3", 250-pound, bald-head white man, Aryan Brotherhood, white nationalist. He looked like a threat. And a lot of times we hear this implicit bias kind of conversation go on, and that officers show up and they see African Americans or people of color, and that bias comes in and they end up dead. How do we train that out?
It's a great point. So I'll get away from 392 for a moment and say, again, it's a start point, much to do on that, but the law will be the law. In Pasadena, last year, 2018 compared to 2017, we dropped use of force by over 30% by doing very specific things when it came to training and officers watching their own body-worn cameras and really looking at themselves and saying, how could I do better? And in a place where it was a debrief just for the personnel. It wasn't the administrative process. Away from that, we've also ensured that we've done better training when it comes to implicit bias and showing them what that might be, as well as mental illness, and at the range training for immersive training to understand the stress indoctrination of what we're doing. So with that in mind—
Let me ask, how are the officers receiving the implicit bias training? Are they open to it? I mean, because required, you say, hey, we're doing this training, they got to show up, right?
Yeah, for the first one last year, for all of us, when I first became the interim, was very difficult for all of us. Now we have to understand implicit bias, much like the word proactive, is actually a scientific term for our mindset. Either you have a fixed or a growth mindset, and being proactive goes to more of being growth. When we talk about implicit biases, we're talking about the subconscious. We're talking about things that we have seen, have been traumatized. Our learning experiences provided us a platform to make decisions. So judgment and decision making can be impacted by those biases. Now, what we know is that implicit bias doesn't mean you're prejudiced, doesn't mean you're a racist. It means that that's part of every human being who's here with us today in the world. Understand that you have implicit biases. So what we do is we put together our immersive training every 2 months at the police range, besides roll call training, to help officers understand the decision-making process. So what you had on Monday was a very high-stress type of training. If we went through that training with you another 2-3 times, do you think in the 4th or 5th time you have a better understanding of your implicit biases and decisions that you're making?
I think I'd have had a better understanding tactically what I did wrong.
Without a doubt.
I still would have perceived the person, the threat, the incidents, like when there was a young white female mother holding a baby and she pulled out a gun. I didn't see her as threatening.
Right.
You know, I mean, so it kind of went, and she ends up shooting the guy, right?
But on your 3rd or 4th training scenario of a similar type of things, you might think, okay, I might not have to shoot this person, but they could be a threat. And this is why when police officers get to a scene of, well, first of all, we don't get called to people's homes when the kids are doing homework and their family's getting along. It just doesn't happen. We get called on the opposite end. So when we walk into an environment, we have to be aware everybody there could potentially lose their temper, or they could be armed, they could have a warrant, something could be happening we don't know of. So when somebody is acting irrational, we have to ask ourselves, is it just us being present, or is there more to it? Do we have something more serious in this situation? And it's a very tough decision for a police officer to make. Now, an officer with 2-3 months off of training might have more difficult process of making those decisions as opposed to a 10, 15-year police officer. That's why I believe so much in retention for the city, not to lose our officers. Better decision is making with the experiences that we have. So you gained experience on Monday, and going forward, you would have had more experiences with immersive training and the stress indoctrination of making decisions.
I mean, I thought, I said, wow, I'm a little concerned, you know. An officer goes, a rookie goes through roughly about 1,000 hours of training in the academy.
6 months, yes.
And then, you know, they have another 18 months, you know, under, with the field training officer and stuff. And so it just, while I didn't have the same experience as someone in 6 months, I'm sitting there still thinking how a young officer comes into the field can make a mistake tactically, and yet we're in a whole bad, you know, other situation and stuff.
That's true.
You know, in terms of, let me check in right here because we're getting short on time. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. My guest today is John Perez, who is the chief of the Pasadena Police Department. We've talked about a critical incident that occurred on last Friday here in the city of Pasadena. We've also talked a little bit more about AB 392 and that legislation that's pending. A scenario that I know all too well, many in my audience know all too well, and many of my peers know all too well, walking while black, you know, and kind of what that experience is. Let's go ahead and roll in this next clip, Hannah, and then we'll jump back in with Chief Perez.
The community certainly needs to be engaged. I believe that change on any police department is going to come from within. And I know that I drive activists crazy when I say this, but I encourage anybody who is angst with the police department to go join it. Get on that police department so that you could be working with a white officer one day who tries to sit somebody that looks like you on the curb, and then you can say, oh no, we don't do that here. We don't set people on the curb. If you're worried about your safety, then let's handcuff them like we're taught and trained, and then let's put them in the back of a police car handcuffed for their safety and ours, because I don't need to set you on a curb to make sure I'm safe. It's disrespectful. And so I had opportunities to do that, and it felt good to me as a young officer.
Contempt of cop.
Contempt of cop.
So many feel persecuted. They feel that they are in occupied spaces. Now, because of the lens of the cell phone and social media and
Right here.
well, you guys have a different lens, but we don't always get access to that.
I
right
try
away.
to. I do try.
But you see through the social spaces, people, filming, streaming, and various different things. You sometimes get this contentious kind of contact with police, this authoritarian type of space that they sometimes occupy. Just because someone pops off doesn't mean that they deserve to be, roughed up or anything. Again, we want to understand culture. How do we get this contempt of cop thing, this authoritarian, this I'm the guy, I'm warrior? How do we get that out of policing?
When you talk about the neuroscience of our brains and how they work, everybody wants to feel safe. Not just somebody that was stopped by the police, but police themselves want to feel safe. We want to feel safe outside the police department when we drive through. We'd like to tell people saying, hey, thank you for your service and supporting them. And when we do have to make traffic stops or we do have to make pedestrian stops or we think there was a crime, trying to do that is the most difficult part of police work. That is really the tip of it. And being able to do that is difficult, and because you may not know what you have. And the other person knows that I didn't commit a crime, so I don't have to listen to you, without understanding some of the laws of reasonable suspicion, a legal detention, compared to what might be a consensual contact. It really is a lot of training more than ever before, not just for the police officers to understand the Constitution of the United States, but of the state, but also our local laws and the penal code to understand what they could do and what they can't do. And if they're making mistakes, we have to train them. If they keep making that mistakes, we terminate them.
But
that's the way it looks.
We keep hearing training, right? And when
Education is a better word.
Experience, I think maybe officers shouldn't be on the force till they're 25. That way their brain is a little bit more developed.
We're pretty close to that. We're pretty close to the average age of being over 25. I was on the street when I was 21 years old, and I worked undercover narcotics when I was 23, 24 years old. So my experiences might have been different, but I do know that when my parents got to know, immigrants from Mexico got to know my police officer friends, they were surprised to say, those police officers are like you. It's like, yes, they are. And I think that is what we're missing here, is the lesson I learned from my own parents to say, hey, look, they're us, they're our neighborhood kids. Now, they've been through some training, they have different experiences, we put them out in the field, they make this stop. I look and I think, man, somebody who robbed somebody last week kind of matches that thing he's got on. I'm going to stop you, James. And now you did no robbery, right? I'm thinking you might have. So the more you tell me, I'm getting out of here, the more I'm saying, no, you're not. What we need is a mediator in the middle to say, hey, look, we got this thing going on. So it becomes a very difficult situation for our community in trying to do that part of policing.
But if officers, like you said, safety, and that's what they're concerned about, they want to be comfortable and whatnot, and reptilian brain, fight, flight, or free, got all of that, right? Mm-hmm. I'm with you. But if they're walking through a community, if they're walking through a park, and the posture is kind of the hand on the vest, even the hand, I don't know if that's just muscle memory.
Sometimes
the perception of it looks like
sometimes it is.
The perception of it is it's intimidating and it's threatening, and then they don't engage. So how are we going to get officers in this city out of the cars, into the neighborhoods? I know you got bike patrol that just started.
Right.
Not driving through.
That's a great point.
Not driving through parks, like
Right.
actually. Because when you think of community policing, you think officers will know members of the community, and many times it looks like the first time they've made contact with that community member is the only time they've ever seen them, unless it's an arrest or something like that. How do you,
Two quick points on that. Number one is, the officers are the ones that create good policing, or bad policing for that matter. We saw use of force drop last year compared to the prior year and what we had done new last year by 30%. This year we're down by another 17%. The officers are making their decisions on use of force out in the field. That's very important. The second part is creating the platform to bring everybody together. Last year we did 4 community conversations. We cannot let those go, otherwise we start all over again. It's been my history for over 30 years in this community, is that we do something that is worthwhile and valuable for our community. Guess what? We stop it, and then we start over.
What did you learn coming out of the community conversations?
I learned that more of those type of environments is what needed to connect my police officers and my community together. I think the community gave me a lot of feedback on what we could do better. I think the police officers learned a lot about the community, and I think the community also learned that we are one. And in fact, they were surprised to find out we have officers that came from the community, and officers saying how difficult it is for us to police this community when you don't understand what we're doing. And then they found out we had officers that were once homeless, have lost, family members to violence, and were in prison, and with the calling that we all have to be in this profession. Something has put us here. So the more we understand one another, the safer our community is going to be, the better we're going to be. So we can't stop at 4 community conversations. We need to talk about our 1,000th, community conversation.
One of the things that came out of those conversations is that people, members of the community wanted younger officers. They wanted some of the younger ones who may not have had the experience growing up in the community or in the neighborhood, or even in this type of diversity. We don't know until we sit down and talk. Right. When can we make something like that happen?
I think we're talking this week or next week with a couple of community members and All Saints. My chief's advisory has been greatly helpful for me in trying to devise these type of platforms. So we have to sit down and plan it out and get it going. I really do want something in summer or by the end of summer that we're back in a room with whiteboards and police officers and community members at the same table. We're about to really maybe flip policing on its head in the police department. We are looking to change over our resources and our structure of the organization to fit what this community needs. The policing services should be what you want. Should be what we need in the community with traffic issues and homelessness and still driving down the gang violence that might be there once in a while, not as high as it used to be. So we have to really reform the department into today's world to fit our community. It's not the same place that it was in the 1980s. I mean, it didn't take too many calls for me to see one of the first calls I went to was somebody shot, and as I'm talking to them, they died. Mm-hmm. This is not that community, but we still have levels of gang violence we have to stop. I think we're getting there. We just need to create these platforms and the connection points to make sure we're all talking to one another.
Chief John Perez, thanks for joining me so much. We're hard up on a break. We got to get ready to get out of here. Again, folks, you're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. My guest today has been Pasadena Police Chief John Perez, and we had a pretty spirited conversation. It wasn't as explosive as the thunder outside today, but yet and still we shared some things. So I appreciate you, John, taking time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you, man. Everything you're doing.
I'll have to have you back on soon, and till we have another opportunity to speak with you, as always, agape. Conversation Live is brought to you by